Okay, great. Thank you so much. So today I am going to talk to you about bridging the gap from traditional to agile project management. This is something I'm particularly passionate about as I've been doing traditional project management for a number of years. And when I was listening to Wendy talk about my experience, I realized that I've probably been teaching webinars, doing webinars through ITMPI for a bunch of years now, because I probably have more like 19 plus years, and I'm kind of at the point where I don't want to count anymore because it makes me feel old. So, with that, my experience fundamentally, or the foundations of it, were in traditional project management, and now I spend a lot more time in agile project management and use Kanban regularly for one of my customers, which is a particular method of agile. So with that, I'm trying to go forward a page here. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about is what is agile, first of all, why we want to use agile and when we want to use agile. Talk about the Agile Manifesto, because I need to talk about that to even have this discussion on this topic. And then what constitutes an agile project. And then I'm going to compare traditional project management to agile project management and how these approaches are different. Then I'm going to talk about agile methodologies and when it's best to use each type. I'm going to cover some different methods and when it's best to use each type and the advantages or disadvantages. So what is agile? So agile is not a method or framework in and of itself. It's really principles that guide teams and that guide development. And agile is a cultural shift. And it's a great solution for some types of projects. However, it's not the best solution for all projects, which is why agile does not just simply replace traditional project management, but offers us another approach for managing projects. It supports open communication between teams, stakeholders, and customers, and it is much different from traditional project management, and we're going to discuss that. So first, I want to bust some Agile myths. There's actually a presentation that I do on Agile myths, and I think it's somewhere in the ITMPI library, so you can maybe look for that later. But these are a few myths that I want to bust when it comes to Agile. So Agile works for any project. That's not necessarily true. There are some projects where traditional project management would be better. For example, if a project has a clearly defined scope, especially if the project time frame is short and the scope's clearly defined, Agile may not be the best approach to use for managing that project. If the project is something that's been done before or similar to it, it doesn't have a high level of complexity, things like that might lend itself to traditional projects. And that traditional project management may be a more efficient and effective use of resources than doing Agile, because Agile is really designed to be open to the uncertainty in scope and changing scope and adapting. And if that's not necessary, then Agile approach may not be the best one to use. Agile is new and better. Actually, Scrum, which is one of the most popular methods in Agile, comes from the early 1990s, so that's definitely not new. And Lean was around long before that, and Lean method is actually is a type of Agile. It's a method of Agile, and it's been around for a very long time. That actually comes from Toyota, and I don't remember the actual date, but I want to say at least 1980. Agile is faster? Not necessarily. The Agile focus is about delivering value to the customer and maybe delivering parts of a product sooner than later, but it doesn't necessarily mean overall for a project that the way Agile does things is faster. So it just depends on how things are done, but it isn't necessarily faster. And in fact, if the scope is clearly defined, applying the Agile approach could make the project take longer. Agile is unstructured. Well, that's certainly not true. If you know anything about Scrum, there's a particular structure and framework for how Scrum is done. And I've taken many classes and given many classes on Scrum. And that framework is never changing. There's a lot of structure in Scrum, and all of the Agile methods have some structure, so it's not an unstructured approach at all. It just has a different structure than traditional project management. This next bullet is supposed to say Agile doesn't have documentation, which is the myth, and I guess I couldn't even write it that way. Agile does have documentation. All projects have documentation. In Agile, our focus is having the minimal amount of documentation that is necessary. So we don't want to just create documents for the sake of creating documents, but we definitely need to document things. Example of that is your product backlog, which is your list of features or requirements for a project. That's actually a document. It's an effective, efficient document, but it is a document. So all Agile projects do have some type of documentation. The next myth is Agile doesn't need requirements. Well, one of my colleagues said to me one time, she was working on a project, and the customer said, well, we don't need requirements because we're doing Agile. And I told her to go back to her customer and say, we're done. With the idea that, like, hey, tell me a requirement that you have that the product doesn't meet. And if they don't have a requirement, then you are done, right? So any project has requirements. You need requirements. You don't have to have all of them fleshed out. You don't have to have the whole list of requirements, but you do need requirements to do Agile. To do any project, you need requirements, because why would you do a project if there are no requirements? There's no project that needs to be done. Agile is cheaper. This is the same kind of myth and a different spin than Agile is faster. Not necessarily. If your scope is well known and not changing, then it's going to be perhaps more expensive, more resource intensive to use an Agile approach. However, if your scope changes often and you need adaptability, Agile will be a cost savings to use it. The next myth is in Agile, the team gets to do what they want. Well, that sounds like utopia, but it's probably not so. And it's true that it is not so. This is a myth. The team does get to pick what work they're going to work on for an iteration. However, it's based on the business value that is prioritized by the customer. So in Scrum, the example of that would be the product owner and the backlog and prioritizing the backlog. And the backlog is used for other Agile methods, not just Scrum. But the team picks items from the backlog, but they don't get to choose the priority. And they pick things based on the priority that's driven by the customer. So they do get to select, but they can't just pick whatever they want to do. It has to be based on what the customer needs. And then lastly, Agile is easy. Well, that's my favorite one as a professor and as an instructor. If Agile was that easy, then I probably wouldn't have a job. So nothing's that easy. Everything requires some effort. And I think particularly the challenge with Agile is the cultural shift. So what is not Agile? It's not the solution to all project management problems. So if you're having a problem getting requirements from customers, using an Agile approach isn't going to solve that problem. If there's a communication problem with the team, using an Agile method isn't going to solve that problem. It's probably actually going to make it worse, because communication is even more critical for Agile projects. Agile is not a toolbox of methodologies to be used as needed. So, for example, you don't just go to the buffet and eat the items in the dessert section and not get any protein or any vegetables or things that you need. So for Agile, we don't just want to pick the tools that we like and then not do the things that we don't like. So that could be dangerous. Agile is also not a replacement for traditional project management processes. Again, these processes are really valuable and really useful for certain types of projects. So we don't want to just get rid of traditional project management. Agile is also not one specific method that projects use. Oftentimes people say we're using Agile, and I go, great, what method are you using?